How can you show your spouse that you love them?
And how can we consistently fulfill their emotional needs?
Welcome back to Bearing Up, the podcast on Christian encouragement. And I am one of your hosts, Zach Griffin, and with me, always, is Logan Bruce.
Glad to be here.
Not ever alone.
You're never alone?
Always with Logan.
You had one episode alone.
Never alone. I know. It's okay. Let's get into our topic for today. You might have clicked on this because you saw, languages of love. What is this talking about? We're going to talk about marriage today, and marriage is always a fun topic to tackle, a very important topic to tackle all the time. And particularly, we're going to focus on how a couple is able to fill their emotional needs in the relationship. How can you feel fulfilled in your marriage? And before we get into kind of our main things, I guess we should kind of go over some preliminary things. And Logan, you are married. I am not. I was, but I'm not. And so I'm going to direct this to you because you are married. But what are some of the things that you have learned from being married?
Well, I've learned first and foremost that failure to communicate is my fault. I'm just kidding. But no, that
it's always the man's fault.
That communication is key. Is what I'm getting at. You know that me and my wife we're one, but we can't act like that if we don't talk to each other. My hands and my body, we're one, but if I don't tell my right hand what my left hand is doing, then it's not gonna work out. And it's the same principle in marriage.
Well, I think that's a great way to get started with this, is just pointing out this idea of the oneness that's supposed to be, there is a we that is so important to focus on. And with that, I think people who have never married before, they're young, they're excited, they have these expectations about what marriage is going to be. And how did the expectations that you had before you got married differ from the reality of actually being married?
Yeah, man, I would probably have to say, a lot of it goes back to communication. But one thing that I think I expected was for things to just snap. I expected certain temptations not to be there. I expected certain things to just click, and none of that is reality. I expected just us to just immediately be on the same page, and I expected certain temptations just immediately go away, and that did not happen at all. I had to continue to fight for those things, and I think one thing I took for granted, me specifically, and I think other people do this too, that's why I'm bringing it up, is when people say, you've got to continue to date your spouse. And I'm like, okay, yeah, right. That'll be easy. No. Yeah. And we came in, we never have had a married time without a kid. Now, it's my stepdaughter, legally. And so we don't have her all the time. But we've never had a married time without a kid. And so we've had to treasure the time where it is just us. That time of still dating each other does not stop, I think, ever.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So, when you're dating, there's a lot of things that come naturally. Right. You just do things for one another, and you don't really think about it. You just do those things. But it doesn't go naturally as much, when you're a year into marriage, or 2 years in, or 3. Those natural inclinations to, buy her flowers or open the door for her or, do all of those little things that doesn't always, come to mind. It doesn't come as naturally as it did before. And that kind of leads to something that I've noticed that's happening a lot. And I feel like there's kind of an epidemic of divorce in the church happening right now. I've heard of in the past 3 years of at least 5 close friends that I've had get a divorce, members of the church, and it's just like so shocking because you would have never thought that, and it's becoming this big epidemic. So why do you think that is that people are, I don't know, like maybe they're just more inclined to divorce, or I don't know what's the issue?
I do think it comes down to I mean, and I'm probably gonna beat this dead horse all day long, but the lack of communication that's where it starts, and then you go from there, and you talk about what the world says, and you talk about all this. But I look at it also from another angle, and it's that of, for the longest time throughout American culture, especially, it's been like divorce was so taboo up until like the last 20, 30 years. And those people just stayed unhappy. And they just were unhappy. And so neither one of those is the proper answer. Getting divorced because you're unhappy, or because you just don't like somebody, that's a personal decision. I'm not here to say what's right and what's wrong on that. But staying in a marriage just because you're unhappy, staying in a marriage when you're unhappy and fighting it the rest of your life is also not the right answer. I think there's a solution to both of these problems.
Yeah. And I mean, there is an admirable idea of, we're going to stay together for the kids. But you don't have to be unhappy in your marriage. There's a lot of people that they get to a certain point and they feel like, well, from here on out, we're just destined to be, hate each other. And we either tough it out or we end it. And so
you said something about staying together for the kids, and I don't like that argument, because I think that there's a time, and we're kind of maybe going a direction you weren't intending here, but if you're going to have a time where the kids go through something, are you going to do it when they're just starting college, 18, or when they're just starting their lives and they're 22, 21, and their parents are now going through something, their whole world is turned upside down? Or are you going to do it when they're little, younger, and they have friends and a support system, and they're more moldable, and they're more able to adapt?
Yeah.
My opinion is that staying together for the kids is a cop-out. But maybe not always. But
no, I mean like in the past. One of the reasons why maybe it was so taboo before, and I think particularly with older generations, that was an excuse to not work on their marriage but stay together.
Yeah.
So, but that's not the answer. It's not, you're just destined to suffer forever.
Right.
There are some wonderful books on marriage, lots of great material to read, and the 2 greatest books that have ever been written on marriage are Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages and Willard Harley's His Needs, Her Needs. And I want to talk about these books today, and I've read through these, pretty familiar with them. Logan, I don't know. Have you read either of these books?
Have not. The one that I actually have is a spin-off book, and they have a bunch of these different spin-off books, but it's also by Gary Chapman. It's the 5 languages of apology, and so it takes the 5 languages and breaks it down into how your love language communicates sorrow or apologies. Sorriness.
And I like that. I'm glad you brought that up because this is moldable. It's not just for marriages. A lot of the content that we're going to be talking about today, there's a 5 love languages for children. How do you love your children with the 5 love languages? For singles, for men, there are the ways that you show love to others. Even there's even a book about how God, performs the five love languages, and so a lot of these things are very universal. For our particular um, topic today, we're going to talk about marriage, but again, we can see these through, lots of different relationships. But what's interesting about both of these books is that they have a completely different method on trying to build affair proof marriages, but there's something very similar about them in the way that they intentionally focus upon the fulfillment of emotional needs. Uh, they look at it in different ways. Particularly in Harley's book, he describes affairs as something which is the result of one spouse looking to fill their emotional needs by another person. But only a spouse can provide all of these emotional needs. So I'm just gonna list these, and maybe we'll take turns. I'll do the five love languages, and I'll let you do the 10 emotional needs of his needs and her needs. And we can kind of stop, and we don't have to explain all of them, but if there's a few that we want to just kind of give some explanations of, we can do that. So the five love languages of Gary Chapman's book are words of affirmation. And this is not just compliments and stuff like that. I'm a words of affirmation person. Words are very important. Words are very meaningful. And they make me feel the most loved.
I will say, so I think a lot of guys are like that. I think words of affirmation and physical touch are probably top two, just if you're a man. Because when my wife says, "Oh, that looks nice," as opposed to "Okay," it's like just night and day how I feel about like that reaction. Anyway.
Yeah, and there's actually a really good reason for that a lot of men are words of affirmation. We'll talk about that. But quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch. So you mentioned that. So those are the five love languages. No, it's good. And these are, I guess, you're not exclusive to one or the other. You might have two, that you particularly respond to. And I will say about the physical touch thing, a lot of guys will think, well, I like sex, so mine must be physical touch. And that's not really what that's talking about. It's more of the hugs and kisses, the hand on the shoulder or on the arm or holding hands, that kind of thing. Gifts doesn't have to be something expensive all the time. I found this feather or I found this flower while I was walking and I wanted to give it to you, and so people respond to these things differently. And we're going to talk about this a lot on this episode about why it's important to try to figure out what love language or what emotional needs your spouse or your, whoever you're in a relationship with, if you are in a relationship, what are their needs and how can you fulfill those things? So the way that it's interesting the way this is all set up in Harley's book. He takes a top 5 emotional needs for men, and these are listed in order. And top 5 emotional needs for women, and he is kind of based this generally. He's a counselor. He's talked to a lot of people, and he's gauged a lot of men and women. And so, from his studies and being a counselor for several decades, he sort of found a consensus among men and women about what things are most important to them. And again, I'll say generally, because you'll look at some of these things and think, that kind of sounds, especially the men, that sounds really shallow, men. It sounds really, really shallow. But it doesn't, that's not necessarily, I guess there's some caveats to these things. And there may be some emotional needs that are more particular of women that some men may have, and some that men particularly have, but women find more
Right.
important for them. Uh, it just kind of depends on the person. But let's go ahead. Why don't you read the top 5 emotional
All
needs
right,
for
let's
men?
do it. Number 1 is alone time. I'm just kidding. Um, is sexual fulfillment. Number 2, recreational companionship. Number 3, an attractive spouse. Number 4, domestic support. And number 5, admiration.
Okay. So, like, how do you feel about some of that, Logan? Like, if somebody said these are the most important things to men, how do you feel about
I
it?
don't disagree.
You don't disagree.
I don't agree with the order,
Yeah.
but I don't disagree with the 5. I think that I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah. And the thing about it is, they may seem shallow a little bit, but his reasoning for the sexual fulfillment has to go with biology, and I'm not really going to go into all of that. But there's a biology around that,
Mm-hmm.
and but recreational companionship, women may think, well, that's very important to me, and that's true. But generally speaking, and what that is it is doing things that you enjoy. It's if the guy enjoys watching, the football game, he enjoys
Right.
it even more when there's that spouse that's there and supportive and enjoying and engaging in it too. Or
Yep.
if he likes to run or likes to do, and it doesn't even need to be something that he likes more, uh, but things that they both enjoy. um, and women may say, well, that's really important to me. But let's look at the top 5 emotional needs for women.
So number 1 is affection. Number 2 is wow, I almost said conservation. Conversation. 3, honesty and openness. 4, financial commitment, and 5, family commitment.
Okay, so women look more admirable, I feel
Yes.
like. And again, I think that some of these needs they can go uh, back and forth among men and women, but there are these things that are pretty consistent within most men and most women. You said that men particularly respond to words of affirmation. Well, that fifth emotional need is admiration, and men
Correct.
want to feel like their woman is proud of him.
Yep.
That's something that's very important, and so
Mm-hmm.
those affirming words are very important. Now, women, they need to feel loved in a very different way. They need that affection, and that's tied for first with men's sexual fulfillment for a reason. Guys can skip the foreplay, right? And I don't want to be crass about that, but guys can they can skip all of that stuff, and for a lot of women, that's the part that they care about quite a bit. They want to have that time of affection,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's what causes a lot of sexual problems within marriage. Is the guy, he wants to, he wants to do it, and the woman will only want to do it if she feels that she's uh, been shown affection. You know,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it kind of goes into the idea that sex is it's a more of a romantic thing, romantic fulfillment than a biological fulfillment for women. Conversation. I love what's actually said in the book about that. And this is a challenge, and we're going to probably talk about this again. But the idea is that um, Like when you date, you talk a lot. You get to know each other. You do all of that stuff. And a lot of women find that their man doesn't talk to them. They don't talk like they used to before. And they fell in love because they were able to have that communication that you were talking about. And that communication is just so crucial. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever that wall is built, because he has nothing to say, uh, they take that very personally. And they take
Right.
that as a deposit or a withdrawal from their love bank. We're going to talk about the love bank in a minute. But before we take our break and have our mid-roll, Logan, is there anything that you've noticed in these lists, or any comments that you want to make about any of these things?
Nothing specifically yet. I've got a few thoughts in the holster that I'm going to hold on to for when we dive in deeper. One thing that jumps out to me, I from my experience, my limited experience, I do have different orders for all these. But one thing that that jumped out to me as we were going through this was when you look at his needs, her needs versus the 5 love languages. I feel as though the his needs, her needs are more based in like the biological difference of a man and a woman, whereas the love language is based in our spiritual relationship with each other and with God. And I was thinking about that as you were talking, and then I was like, well, that totally makes sense because God is love, and the love languages are how we communicate, how we relate to God with each other. So that's something that jumped out to me as we were going through this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That's a whole rabbit hole, but whatever.
Yeah, well, maybe. I think I feel like the biological thing is probably more with the sexual stuff. We've talked about that, but
Sure, right.
there are some other things that may have been a part of that too.
Well,
You know,
I even mean with as far as for the women, honesty and openness, and financial commitment and family commitment. That can connect into the spiritual life, but a lot of times that just comes down to a woman's instinct of taking care of her family and needing a man who's going to fulfill that. A basic human instinct, and similar for a man on the other side, the admiration part and an attractive spouse, and it's kind of like who I am as a man,
yeah,
versus who they are as a woman, and you could remove, maybe not totally, but remove the spiritual conversation from that conversation. But I think when we talk the 5 love languages, it's inside of the spiritual conversation. That's just my opinion.
okay.
I think, but that's why I think it's so good that we're doing both of these, because you can't have one without the other. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think they overlap.
Yes.
Very well.
Yeah.
One that as we're reading through these that we may not understand, we've got a couple here. You've got family commitment and domestic support. Now, what do those two things mean? Now, for the man, the domestic support has to do with, his need to feel that the woman is able to manage her household well.
Right.
And that domestic support becomes, it's historically been a need for men, because men have, they've been the breadwinner and they work, and they particularly have that need because they come home and feel like they've got to rest from their work. But nowadays, when most men and women work, that becomes a need for women as well. Sure. And there become some issues when needs like that aren't met. And it's a division of chores and all of those different things like that. Now, family commitment, that is different because women see the roles of the family have to be fulfilled. So the man needs to be a good father. That's very important in the family commitment. He needs to be a good father. He needs to be able to, take care of children in a way that you know they build relationships with them. Um, there's a commitment there that, and we can go into a lot more of this stuff with all of these different needs and talk about them specifically. You know, what I would recommend is that everyone read these two books because I really do believe that they're the greatest on the market as far as marriages. And I think that if you really were to sit down and try some of the things that these men put forth, I think it could revolutionize any marriage. So we're going to get into this a little bit more, talk about these things in a different perspective. Things that you should and shouldn't do, and all of that as we move forward right after this break. Thank you so much for watching or listening today. We want to remind you to follow us, like us, share on social media, write a written review somewhere, whether it's on our Facebook page or on Apple Podcasts. Please do that because it kind of helps build our audience a little bit more. We want to also recognize the Ministry League. They're a wonderful group, and we're glad to be a part of this league. And so go check them out, download the app, and become a patron. We talk about this each time because it's so important for the future of this work. But you're missing a whole lot of content. There are live videos that are done every week, multiple times a week, and you're missing out on a lot of good stuff if you're not a patron. So go to our Patreon. It's just patreon.com/bearing up. That's all that it is. And you can check those things out. Our lowest tier is $1 a month. And you'll be able to get some live videos, early access, lots of other things. So please remember all these things, and thanks for watching. So I want to talk about another concept that's important with marriage and the relationship of man and woman, and the relationships that we have with others. And it's a concept that's talked about in two different ways in both these books. In Gary Chapman's book, he calls it a love tank. And so you've got this tank above your head that gets filled up or gets depleted. And so your spouse has to constantly fill that love tank in order for you to feel loved by them. But I particularly like Willard Harley's description of a love bank. And so
he changed a letter.
Yeah, he changed a letter, and that's all the difference. But the love bank is a concept where you have a bank, like a financial institution, that kind of bank, and there are multiple accounts where people add, they deposit into that bank, or they make withdrawals from their account. And so this kind of puts forth this idea that everyone in your life has an account, and what is being added or taken away from that account influences behaviors and how you feel about that person. So like your children have accounts for you and your spouse. And so they may feel particularly different ways. Not that it's competition, but they may feel, it is. But they may feel particularly about, mom or dad or, whoever, based off of the deposits that are made into those accounts. And I like this particularly because it makes you aware that others can deposit love into that bank, not just family. And so that kind of helps to understand how affairs and different things like that happen. When somebody is depositing into that account, and they're, making you feel loved, and maybe some of these other ways in affection and conversation and recreational companionship and all of that stuff, um, you know, and your spouse is just making withdrawals, uh, that's how affairs happen, and that's what he talks about in his book. So, with this in mind, uh, first I want to talk about withdrawals from those accounts, things that will make you fall out of love. Um, things that you can do and or should not do to withdraw from your spouse's account to make them not feel loved. And I've got a few of these, and Logan, I guess you've probably got a few too. Before we do this, though, is there anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah, so but this is one thing that I was thinking earlier, and I'm going off the path, but follow me, we'll be back on it in just a second. So one thing that I've taken the test on the love languages. I've not read the book. I'm vaguely familiar with it. I know them all, obviously. But I know my wife's, and I know how she communicates. And that's important for us. We talked about communication, and with the 5 love languages, we come back to that. And I prefer the 5 love languages, but I also like the bank analogy. I prefer that one to the tank. But with knowing my wife and knowing her, I know how to communicate with her. My love language is not gifts. I don't want a gift. Don't need a gift because I'm going to buy it for myself.
Because you're
if you have, okay, if you have to give me something, make it a gift card. But my wife is not. My wife is the 7 though, but she's different in this way, where she likes gifts and acts of service for her are up there. But not necessarily receiving gifts, but giving gifts. And so that's how she communicates that she loves. But that's not mine. But she likes to give gifts, even though I'm not a gift language person.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that about her.
Yeah.
And so even though when I get a gift from her, I'm not like, oh, this is great. I feel that inside because I'm like, that's how she's communicating she loves me.
Yeah.
Even though I don't feel a certain way about this gift, I feel a certain way about the actions she took to get this here.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a different angle of looking at it, but the same is with acts of service with her. I try to do a lot around the house, but there's certain things, like when I do something out of the norm, that's an act of service. She definitely perks up with that because that's her love language, but that's also how I communicate that I love. So it works out really well in that. But coming around to that, you were talking about things that make you fall out of love. It's when you know your person and you're like, well, I just would rather not. When you begin making those selfish, I can't say this 2 words together, selfish decision. There. When you begin doing that, it's sometimes not a big deal. Sometimes it's just once. Sometimes it's, well, I didn't do the laundry this weekend, even though I was off and you were working, because I would rather have done this. And I did do that. Okay, once. And so it's, I believe it's a slow progress, though, into selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
That, well, I don't really necessarily care about how you feel. I don't necessarily, and maybe that's not a conscious thought, but that's what your actions are saying when you put your own love languages above your spouse's.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great thing to clarify, is that oftentimes the way that people show love is the things that you find important. So, like, for instance, I'm a words of affirmation person. And with my girlfriend, I shower her with all kinds of praises. And I just do that all the time because that's how I feel loved. Now, that's not her love language, so I have to consider that too. Hers is quality time. So I have to make sure that we spend time together and that it's quality. My focus
Right.
is not divided on a bunch of other things. And when it's focused upon her, she has my undivided attention. That's how she feels loved. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to have as much attention as long as I feel those. Uh, I don't need to have that huge quality time as much as she does, as long as I feel affirmed and admired and all of that. Now, I will say quality time is my second most most important love language. So it kind
Yeah.
of works out a little bit. But yeah, so recognizing that they are trying to love in a certain way and not reciprocating. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
because when they show that love in that particular way, it may be an insight um, about how they want to feel loved. So if you want to do something bad, if you want to withdraw your love from somebody else, from
Yeah.
you know, then don't reciprocate.
Yeah.
Just don't reciprocate. Now, one thing that I think is important, though, when we talk about that, that'll make you fall out of love is doing things for the other person that make you resentful. Now, some people might say, well, you should just do it anyway, just tough it out. But if you are starting to resent the other person because you feel obligated to do something, that doesn't really help anything. So, like for instance, maybe there's a chore that they want done, but you absolutely hate it. Why do you have to do the chore if they're the one that wants it done? That's something to think about, right? I mean, it's another thing if they can't do it, but it's another thing entirely if and so one way that you can kind of get around that is you communicate what you know what things you can do, right? uh, what things the domestic support issue that we talked about. The man, he wants to come home, and he wants to come home after work, and he doesn't want to have to deal with everything. He doesn't want to have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with the chores and the raising the children and all of that stuff oftentimes. But you can't expect for her, especially if she works, to do it all, right? And most women will look at their men and say, I wish he would do more, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where that communication comes in. So don't do the things that make you resentful of the other person, but do things that will show your love for them and things that you enjoy doing for them. That's how you.
Yeah.
That's something you can do to grow closer.
That's a great point. There's. I don't think anything should be done out of obligation or because that's when it does become resentful. But when you do things because they will enjoy this and because I want them to be happy, that's the reasoning that should be behind any kind of act of love. Um, one thing that another point that I think can often push towards the "well, I don't love you anymore" area is criticism, and there's a lot of it's easy to criticize. Let's just say that because there's a type of person, and I don't know if it's if it's a type on the Enneagram, whatever it is, that they believe criticism, and I might be one of them. My wife probably will tell you I am. That they believe criticism is communication, but it's not.
Yeah.
Okay? So for me to say, why did you do this way? You shouldn't have done this way. Look how bad it is, X, Y, and Z. That's not communication.
Mm-hmm.
That's closer to berating. If I feel like she should have done something differently, I say, hey, in the future, I would like for you to do it like this. That's good communication, as opposed to a negative type of criticism. if we focus, and that comes back to what a lot of we try to emphasize here, is bearing people up, encouraging, is we spin our words in a positive way. You can get your point across in a positive way without tearing somebody down or criticizing them in a non-constructive way.
Yeah. And with that...
And I think that's... I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that especially applies to spouses, because you shouldn't have to be in a situation where you have to adjust your thinking because, well, they're criticizing me, but I know that they're just trying to communicate. Well, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. So understanding that criticism is not something you should ever do, but, if you have a complaint about something, there's a way of communicating that.
Right.
I didn't like the way that made me feel, and I would feel better if it was done this way, or I would feel better, because it's one thing to say, well, he never talks to me, and he doesn't open up, and he doesn't do this. Well, oftentimes when you criticize, what actually happens is you get the opposite of your intended result, right?
Right.
You don't ever talk to me. Well, what is he going to do oftentimes if he gets berated like that? He's going to close up. He's not going to want to talk if he gets belittled like that. But if she says, it would mean a lot if we spent some time talking. I really miss how we used to talk when we were dating. Different things like that, communicating in a different way versus belittling or, bringing them down. It's so important that you understand, or that we understand, that in marriage, that the principle of Christian words, let no corrupting word come from your mouth, but only such as is building up as fits the occasion. That's so important in marriage. And so criticism, not something you should do, but instead you should let your complaints be known. Now, there's another one that's very important that'll make you fall out of love with your spouse, and it's letting people of the opposite sex deposit into your love bank. And there's a lot of people that feel like, well, if people are just being friendly, that's not anything that you should worry about. But anything, any kind of depositing into that love bank in affection or conversation or quality time or acts of service, all of that stuff, most affairs start with those little innocent things. And we say innocent things, but when you allow somebody to make those deposits into that love bank, they start fulfilling some of those needs. They'll never be able to fulfill them all. But when people start feeling loved by them, they find themselves in a situation where they feel like they're in love with two people. And that's how marriages end, is with things like that. Logan, you have anything to say about that one?
I don't. You hit the nail right on the head. It's, I think that's pretty cut and dry, and I think that you see that play out very well in movies and television. That it's just innocent, but I don't think it's. I just don't think it's something to mess around with.
Yeah.
Because
the Hallmark movies where they're dating somebody and then they meet this rugged person that has coffee with them sometime, and then they leave that person, and usually their first, spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, usually they're like painted in a bad picture, but there's a relationship there. It makes
you feel better.
Yeah, and it makes you feel better that they end the relationship to be with somebody else, but there's a relationship there, and it's present. And those relationships fall apart because, and it's romanticized because somebody else is coming in and they're fulfilling their needs, and that's why we call it affairs and not adultery, the way that it should be called, and that's just it's looked light upon, and it's romanticized even sometimes.
Yeah, I'll say though, in that situation, the message they're trying to get across is you want to find the best person for you, and I agree with that. I think that when you're in a dating situation, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Marriage is a whole nother conversation, and and you do want to find the best person for you, the person who God has put in your life. But when you're dating, that's what you're doing, is trying to find that.
Yeah.
So marriage is a different animal.
True. But the principle's the same. This idea that
Sure.
when you allow others to deposit into your love bank, you're building love with that person. So
Right.
anyway, well, let's talk about some things that will make you fall more in love. Some of the deposits.
Good. Positive.
Yeah. We're going to end positively. So what are some things that you can do to make deposits, not withdrawals, but deposits into their love bank?
Communicate.
Communicate. Are you going to do some ASMR stuff?
No.
So number one, this is important. Talk together about what makes you feel loved, and commit. So there it is, like what we're talking about today. Figure out what they need, and commit to doing those things.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is an ongoing thing. Yeah, even the other day, I asked my wife. I was like, "What are you interested in? Like, what makes you happy?" And like, we've been married for we're gonna have 2 years this fall, and I'm still like, what makes you happy? Like, what do you like to do? Because I'm still trying to like learn her and still trying to figure her out. What can we do together that would be fun for you? Because a lot of times we end up doing the thing that I want to do, and that's fun for me, and we can keep doing that forever. But I want to also do the things that are fun for her to do.
Well, I would say that she recognizes your need for recreational companionship.
She does, yes, yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. That y'all communicate in that way, and I would suggest, yeah, that's a great thing for all couples to do. And there's things that you enjoy, and then you turn out later you don't enjoy them as much, and so you continue to learn. You continue to find out, what they enjoy and how they feel loved.
Yeah. For sure.
I want to say this one is okay. So this one is from Willard Harley's book, and it's talked about in the chapter about conversation as one of the emotional needs for women. And he said, this is what you need to do. Every couple needs to do this. You need to have 15 hours a week of focused attention on each other. And I guess it's like undivided attention. So it's not talking about like sitting down and watching a movie.
Right.
It can be done doing something too. You can do a recreational, thing at the same time. But
you have to be staring into each other's eyes, or it does not count.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. But
15 hours straight.
But if you think about it, that's 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day out of your whole day. I mean, and if you do that though, it fulfills her need for conversation, right? It allows you to be honest and open. This is very important for women. And it's important for men too, because they need to have that communication and, need to figure out these things. And, you work on your marriage. And so maybe it's something that again, when you're dating, this is not an issue. Like, you call each other and you talk for hours, and you may be talking for a few hours into the middle of the night or something like that. And you know, in addition to actually going on dates and stuff, and you don't find
Right.
it hard at all when you're dating. So why is it that oftentimes people come home from work and they eat separately and they don't say anything to each other and they're tired and they just go to bed? And you know why is that? And so if you do that, if you spend that time and make that important, then uh, that's a tool. That's something that you can do, and it'll cover a lot of these things. So.
It does, and it covers a lot of. Man, I mean, you look at the emotional needs, but also the 5 love languages. It covers a lot of that, and I think that that's you did that when you're dating, and that's kind of, I think, something that we alluded to earlier, is continuing to have that I'm dating my spouse mentality. Is not easy to can bring into a marriage, because there's this feeling of, well, this is what we are, here we go, I'm not changing, they're not changing, but that's the point. We're growing together and we're learning together, learning more I want to learn more about something every day about my wife till we're done, till one of us passes away. And so that's what's good about that. At first you're like, 15 hours. That's more than I spend at work, but then that's maybe more than you spend at work in one day. And you would absolutely take that time when you were dating, so why not take that time now?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm preaching to myself also.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, but speaking of dating, here's a surefire way to make sure that you're continuing to grow in love, and that is to continue doing the same things that you did when you were dating. It may not come as natural, and sometimes, we talked a little bit about obligation and stuff like that. There are things that you may, especially if you are in a very low point in your marriage, there are some things that you may have to force yourself to do.
Right.
But those things that need to be consistent is to do the things that you did when you were dating. If y'all did, if one of the favorite things that y'all did was, to, I don't know, go swimming or go jogging or, go play putt-putt or, just spend time with each other, or, if a big thing was that communication and talking every night and all of that, don't let those things go away, even if they don't feel as natural as they used to, because you continue life and you have all these distractions and stuff. And this is important because that's who they fell in love with, right? They fell in love with the person that they dated, and they decided to marry you because of who you were and what you were doing. Now, if you get married and all of that stops, like, for instance, in the chapter about an attractive spouse, right? There was a story that was told about this girl, and she, she was a heavier set girl, and she decided that I'm going to lose a bunch of weight, and I'm going to work on myself and all of that, and I'm going to attract a man. And that's what she did. And then she decided that she wasn't going to keep up that lifestyle after she got married, and he, responded to that. Why did she change herself to attract a man and then quit that after they got married? That's. But I mean, it's not just that. It's so much of everything else. Uh, if your woman particularly likes that you are a chivalrous man and you do things old school, right? You give her flowers and you open her car door and you do those little things that are important to her, and she falls in love with you for that reason, or partly for that reason, and then you just stop doing it altogether. Well, how is that going to make her feel? Right? So you have to continue to do things that you did when you were dating. Now, Logan, what were some things that you did when you were dating?
Well, this has actually been a very good conversation, and I'm glad this podcast won't come out for a few days, because then my wife will think that I came up with the stuff that I've been thinking on my own. But things like, I haven't got her flowers in a while. I always do Valentine's Day and her birthday, those which are 6 months apart, which works very well. I do a big bouquet of flowers, but I try to do every now and again little bouquets in between, and I haven't done those in a while, which is on me. But stuff like that, little flowers. I like to, and I still do. I just the stuff like making the bed, and she likes a lot picking up after her, because that's mostly for me, actually. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of little things, and like I said earlier, my wife's love language #1 is acts of service, and so there's the things. I'm about to go mow the lawn right after this, and so that's a big. She'll come home and immediately be in a good mood when she sees the lawn. So again, maybe that's mostly for me, but there's a give and take, and when you become one person, the same things eventually end up making you happy, and so that's kind of, we're not there yet. If I was about to say that's where we're at, but no, it's headed that direction. Where we've gotten a groove, and I communicate my love for her, and she in ways she expects. And now, if I stopped doing some of those things, it'd be red flags, and vice versa. But the flowers is the big one, because I was just thinking I need to go
Chicks
get her
do
bouquet
that
of flowers.
stuff.
Yeah. I'm just sitting here like, I haven't done that in a long time.
No.
So I know where I'm going after I mow.
Well, yeah. So there's lots of stuff, and I feel like this is one of those really important things. You got to continue to do the stuff that you did when you were dating.
It's a pursuit.
Yeah. Right.
And one thing, all right, this is just what it is. This is who I was, so I'm sorry. In college, I likened myself to like a lion, and I wanted to be on the hunt. I'm serious. And you laugh hard like that, everyone else is laughing like that too. But I wanted to be hunting. Like, I wanted to be chasing a girl. And when I got her, she was my girlfriend, I gave up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't care. I had many relationships in college that lasted a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Because I gave up. I was like, I got her, whatever. And I immediately got bored. And I was very immature. But then I get to adulthood, and I've not. When I feel that way now, I have to remember myself. I still have to pursue this person. The hunt is not over.
No, it's not.
And so that helps. That helps a lot. But yeah, so the hunt never. You don't ever win. Right. In that analogy.
Yeah. So like you still work, and it's a wonderful thing when you recognize that the other person feels loved.
Well, and that's, yes, that, but with kind of still piggybacking on my analogy, it's the person worth hunting.
Yeah.
And obviously I think that's very much a guy analogy. I don't think girls relate themselves to animals ever, but I do it all the time. But in that scenario, those those girls, from my perspective at that time where I was, they were not worth hunting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I did it, checked the box, and that was never going to work. When I found the person who was worth pursuing on a regular basis, that was when I know, okay, this is what I want to do.
There you go. And you keep building.
Correct.
Now, there's one other point that I wanted to make, and if there's any more, Logan, on either of these things, we can talk about them. But when you do receive criticism, if this does happen, it's very easy to just take it personally, and maybe this is for those that are particularly at a low point in their marriage. When you take criticism, don't make that the reason for you not to try and to take it personally, but look at those things strictly as information about what need they need fulfilled. So if they complain, or not complain, but if they criticize and belittle, there's some kind of need, there's some kind of truth to that idea. And it's very easy. So like, for instance, we brought up earlier, you don't ever talk anymore and you're so closed off and all of that stuff. Well, what need does she have that she wants fulfilled? She wants conversation. She wants honesty and openness, right? Mm-hmm. She wants the quality time. She wants the, that need to be met, for that love language to be fulfilled. And so taking those things as information versus shutting down and giving in to the natural response to do the opposite, because right. The criticism, you're just, it's very easy. Okay. You want to naturally just do the opposite. There's the term nagging, right? When you nag, or when somebody nags the other person, does that make them want to do it more? No, not really. No, they resist. They push back even harder than they did before. But and that's the natural thing to do.
It is.
But instead, try to take that as information about some need that they need fulfilled.
Well, and a lot of it is realizing you're not the only human.
Yeah.
And that goes back to like what I talk about a lot with driving. You have to realize there's a person driving that car that they've lived a lot today already, and they've gone through stuff you don't know. And that's the same for your spouse. Even though you are married, they come home and they've lived a day that you have not, or vice versa. And there's communication that needs to take place to make sure you get on the same page every night, so that but until that communications take place, until the pages are on, until you're both on the same page, there's going to be missteps like that. And I'm sorry I criticized you earlier. I've had a bad day. Oh, well, that makes sense. I'm glad I didn't pop off or and start a whole argument. And I'm speaking from experience with all that, but anyway, so there's just a level of understanding the human side of everything.
Yeah. You're not perfect. Neither will they be perfect. Another thing that's so important about marriage that we haven't talked about is when you put somebody in the place of God and you put them on the pedestal where God is supposed to be, and you put on them your happiness. Like, you're not going to be happy unless they make you happy, and unless they're perfect, really, then you're not ever going to be happy. We have to understand that God has his place, and nothing should ever go in his place.
Correct.
And making sure that give and take is a reality, right? There's a give and take. It's not marriage is not a selfish thing to do. It should never be a selfish thing to do. And in fact, if we look at the biblical model of marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, the reflection of Jesus and the church, I feel like that is the key to marriage. If you're looking for a passage of scripture that's going to show you how this is supposed to really look, and just a simple way of doing it, men, you love your wife the way that Jesus loves you, and it's self-sacrificial. It's not selfish.
Absolutely.
And then wives, there's a respect and a submission and a love that the church gives to Jesus, and in the same way, that's how wives are supposed to love. I mean, that's the image, right? But that's selfish, or not selfish. It's selfless too. We aren't in a relationship with Jesus strictly because of all the things that we want from him, right? No, we want to please Jesus. We want to grow closer to him. We want to, we sing the song, I surrender all, right? We want to be submissive to him because he's deserving, and because that's the relationship that we're to have with him. So looking at that, I think that's probably the final thing that I'll say. But is there any other things that you wanted to mention since we're talking about marriage today, Logan?
No, man. It's a good episode. This has been all Zach, by the way. He put this all together. You probably could tell that, by the way. It's probably nothing new. But good topic. It's something that I think there's two types of, maybe more, but there's at least two types of ways that people handle marriage problems. They either just allow everything, and you know what, if you all want a divorce because you looked at each other funny, whatever. Or there is zero tolerance. And I think that, again, Jesus would feel somewhere in the middle. That there's a time and a place for everything, but ultimately, we talked about the love languages. How do you relate to your spouse, and how does God fit in that equation? Is ultimately the solution. And it's interesting to me. I guess I understand, and maybe this is going on a tangent. I understand the pull away from marriage in general in our culture, because I'm seeing a pull away from God in general in our culture. And marriage is a God thing.
Yeah.
So why would you get married if you don't believe in God? That's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
And so I guess I understand that, and I think that the reason we've had problems as a culture is a diversion from the true sense of what marriage is for probably 100 years or more, but also a diversion from God.
Yeah. And his design has always been and will always be one man and one woman for life. That's God's intention behind it. And
Satan's biggest lie is that God's yoke is heavy.
Yeah.
And it's not.
No.
If you just include God in your life, he basically carries his own yoke for you. Satan's lie is, well, God asks a lot of you. You might as well just do whatever you want.
Yeah. And so we need to look to Scripture, and there's a lot of Scripture we could have added to this episode today, and maybe there'll be another episode, Marriage According to the Bible or something like that. I don't know. We always have lots of ideas about episodes when we're recording.
We're going to have to go back. Our next season break is going to only consist of rewatching past seasons to see what episodes we said we were going to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching and listening. We're going to have the servant spotlight again. So remember to look at that. We'll do that after the prayer. Logan, why don't you wrap us up?
Let's pray together. God, I'm thankful for today. I'm thankful for my brother Zach. I'm thankful for this conversation we've had. Lord, I'm thankful for the institution of marriage that you blessed us with. And I know that there's a lot about it in the Bible. And I pray, God, that if somebody has questions about what's the right decision for them, whether they're married, looking at marriage, or not married, God, I pray that you bless them with the knowledge and bless them with where to go to find your answer for their questions. Lord, I pray that we're always a resource to everybody who has any questions, and I pray, God, that you be with this work. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So the servant spotlight this week is going to go to my own family, actually. My grandmother just moved down here to Dallas. Wow. Down here to Tyler. I wish I was in Dallas. And this past, actually just today, this morning, my brother, who does live in Dallas, and my parents who live in Oklahoma City, they came down this weekend, and I've pretty much been the one helping my grandma get moved in, settling up, and they helped knock a bunch of stuff out in her apartment, and it was very good. And I know that that's family, and you help family out, but it was a big blessing to me, and so I'm shouting them out from the Servant Spotlight. Thanks for watching.